the newsagents.
Our president, Joe Biden, wanted to be here today. He is feeling much better and recovering fast, and he looks forward to getting back on the road. And I wanted to say a few words about our president. Joe Biden's legacy of accomplishment over the past 3 years is unmatched in modern history. In one term, he has already, yes, you may clap. In one term, he has already surpassed the legacy of most presidents who have served 2 terms in office.
Kamala Harris there, Joe Biden's VP, who is now going hell for leather to make sure she is the presidential candidate.
The king is not quite dead, but the queen nearly has the crown on her head. And you want to believe what she has pulled off in the 24 hours or so since Joe Biden announced that he was out of the race. But formidable challenges still remain. And on today's episode, 2 extraordinary figures, one extremely close to Harris and Biden, and the other one of our leading historians on what happens next for America. Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily.
And last night we got together and recorded an emergency episode when the news had just broken. Emily was on a hard shoulder somewhere in a car, doing her best to maintain a signal. Lewis was in Seattle and I was here. And we've learned a bit more, haven't we, about how this unbelievably dramatic weekend unfolded.
Yeah, there was a gasp of breath, wasn't there, on Sunday night when Joe Biden's statement landed. And then there was a kind of acknowledgement that we had, I guess, felt that it was coming sometime between Sunday and Monday. And the process has now become a little bit clearer. So I understand that it all happened on Saturday evening. And he sat down with 2 of his closest advisors, Steve Ricchetti and Mike Donnellan. And they essentially told him, spelt out to him, that the path to victory at this point was non-existent. And if you go back and see the phraseology that Biden has constantly used, it has been, nobody's told me that I can't win. Nobody's told me that I don't have a way of winning this race. And Saturday evening was the point at which they said, you do not have a path to victory. You cannot win. And that was when the drafting of the letter began. And he kept it so close to his chest that apart from these very close, senior advisors, most of his campaign team didn't hear about it until the very moment that the letter was posted online. And
as I understand it, there was one other visitor to the beach house in Rehoboth, Delaware, and that is Chuck Schumer. And Chuck Schumer went there and had a 40-minute meeting with Biden.
This is the Senate leader.
Yeah, the Senate majority leader. So the most powerful Democrat in the Senate, a long-standing friend of Joe Biden. Schumer goes there and says, look, it's over. Schumer felt that his advisors weren't telling him the unvarnished truth about the dire state of polling. And I think he appealed to Biden, not just for himself, but to his legacy and the danger that if he didn't get out of the way, his legacy would be that the Democrats would lose not only the White House, but the Senate and the House in November as well. And therefore, for the sake of patriotism, he ought to get out the way.
Yeah, we should just tell you that we've got a couple of incredible voices in this episode. We're going to be speaking to somebody who was absolutely central to the Biden campaign of 2020 and to the 2 Obama campaigns as well. And a big donor, a big part of the fundraising campaign, who's going to be spelling out for us what he knew and when and how he sees this playing out. We'll also be hearing from the historian Simon Schama, who has pointed out to us that Joe Biden is not the first candidate to pull out the race. He's not even the second, if you're thinking of LBJ. He's actually the 6th, more of which a little bit later.
But what we ought to do now, as well as the drama of what unfolded, what has happened since? Because Kamala Harris has been anointed by Biden. She has said she is running and wants to earn the support of the American people. And although Kamala Harris gets a bad rep on an awful lot of things, believe me, she is a very effective backroom operator who understands the retail nature of politics and the business of politics, of how you need to get support. So as we speak, overnight, 153 House Democrats, so kind of nearly half of them, have come out and said they support Harris. 32 senators have come out and said they support her. 12 of the 23 governors have said the same. 4 state delegations, New Hampshire, North Carolina, South Carolina and Tennessee, have also said they support her. And she has raised $50 million overnight. So obviously she probably had a bit of a heads up that this announcement was coming. But by God, has she moved quickly since then, so that you almost get a sense that there is this kind of heavy articulated lorry coming towards you at 30 miles an hour, and you either get out of the way or you are roadkill.
Yeah, I mean, she spent 10 hours on the phone doing this last night, and it is possible that she could take command of this entire war chest, $241 million, which is in both Biden and her name, because they are the ticket together. So if that then transfers to her, she has a lot of cash to play with. I just want to go back over something that you dropped in, and I think it's about what Kamala does well and badly. And I want to say that actually, I don't think we know enough about Kamala to know whether she has done things badly. I know that is the perception that, oh, she screwed up the border because she gave that terrible interview in which she said she hadn't been to the border and she hadn't been to Europe either. She's been incredibly strong on women's rights, on abortion issues. She's been the one that got sent down to Arizona when they were about to change the law and go back to 1864. And just her appearance in that state made many of the legislators there row back because it's a swing state. She's also been, I think, Joe Biden's voice on Gaza when he was very much taking the sort of Israel line. And she might find that that plays much better for young people, for people in swing states like Michigan and Wisconsin, or states with large Arab American populations, or just young people in general. And so I just feel like we should row back a little bit on this whole question of, like, isn't she terrible? Isn't she a bad candidate? We don't know her very well, is the truth. We do know that she has been the person selling the president's message on the campaign trail for the last 2 or 3 years. And so she probably knows a lot of these people much better than we understand.
I would just say, in the years that I was in DC and she was vice president, Biden was president, there was a lot of kind of behind, cupped hands saying she wasn't very good, she didn't delegate well, lacked leadership in her office, staff didn't know where they were, she didn't pay enough attention to policy detail, and that there was a simmering sort of disappointment, I think, that was felt that she hadn't really stepped up in the way that they had hoped into the vice president role. So I think that is an issue, and I think that also, liberal Californian will be seized on. Not liberal,
actually quite conservative in how she's
criminal
prosecuted.
Justice.
In criminal justice, very, very conservative.
Yes, but I think that will, but the way she will be depicted by the Trump campaign is that she's just this sort of super woke feminist liberal.
And I have to say, there is something very Californian about the way she talks. One of our producers described it as word salad. And I want to play you a little taste of that, because sometimes it is hard to work out what she's actually said.
For us at every moment in time, and certainly this one, to see the moment in time in which we exist and are present, and to be able to contextualize it, to understand where we exist in the history and in the moment as it relates not only to the past but the future.
Yeah, not great. And she's going to have to obviously be a lot clearer in her messaging from now on. But the process that we were just mentioning a moment ago, you have a Democratic Party convention. There are something like 4,700 delegates. They were pledged to Joe Biden. They are now no longer pledged. They are up for grabs, as it were. And what Kamala Harris is going to try to do over the coming weeks is to get as many of those delegates as possible so that she is elected unopposed. The question then becomes does anyone oppose her? And this is the space we are watching. There are 2 or 3 names out there of people who might just think, oh, you know what? I wouldn't mind having a tilt at being president. I quite fancy being in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I'm going to give it a go. This is my moment. I think there'll be an awful lot who will...
The Robert Jenricks of America, should we call them?
Exactly. So there are a couple of governors. There is a senator from West Virginia called Joe Manchin, who was a Democrat, who's become an independent, who's apparently said that he's thinking about it. I'm not sure how serious that is, and I don't think he would get many delegate votes. That said, if it becomes a contested convention, it's unknown territory. We are in uncharted waters because it could become very messy and bloody indeed. Kamala Harris doesn't want that. But equally, if it looks like it's a coronation and that this is some kind of regal process, that it's her hereditary right to become the candidate, I think that's a bad look as well. So those delegates are up for grabs, and it's now about getting a majority of them to fall in behind Kamala Harris that makes a serious contest impossible.
Look, the cleverest thing that the Democrats have done in 24 hours is to make the conversation exciting again. Everyone wants to know if it's going to be Kamala or somebody else. Everyone wants to know if there's going to be a VP, a running mate that they've heard of, or somebody that they like, or somebody that compliments her, or somebody that's terrible. They're all looking now to August the 19th in Chicago, which is the week that the Democratic Convention takes place. And the important thing is, the agenda has been set by Trump. For the last 3 weeks, it has been Trump's court cases, it's been Trump's legal affairs, it's been the Supreme Court rulings, it's been the attempted assassination, the attempt on his life, and it's been the Republican convention. Now, suddenly, everyone is looking at what the Democrats are going to do next. And they have to use this to find that oxygen to say, we've got the world's attention, we've got the media attention. We're just actually going to enjoy this for a little bit without looking chaotic, just looking interesting.
One of the people who will be at the convention, who is a significant player in all of this, is Ambassador Tony Gardner. He has been part of the Biden-Harris campaign. He was part of the Biden campaign in 20. He was Barack Obama's ambassador to the European Union in the years that Obama was the president. He is an absolutely instrumental fundraiser, and we're going to be talking to him next. We are joined in the studio by Ambassador Tony Gardner, who was the America's ambassador to the EU during the Obama administration, but more relevantly has been part of the Biden-Harris campaign since before it started. And Tony Gardner, it's great to have you on the News Agents. I can only imagine what the last however long has been like or felt like. Has the campaign got to the right place now with Biden pulling out?
Well, thanks for inviting me to the show. A huge admirer of both of you. I should say right away, I'm not a spokesman for the campaign, to be clear. So I have been involved in the campaign in Europe. I'm a London resident for the past 24 years. A week is a long time in politics, as you know better than anyone. We are in the right place. It took him, I think, 26 days to arrive to that conclusion. But he made the right call for the good of the country, and his legacy is preserved. And I say that as someone who has admired him for a long time. I've known him for decades. I've worked with him, especially when I was in Brussels as ambassador to the EU. I had him come to Brussels on a number of occasions, partly because of trade issues we had, partly because of data privacy issues we had, and he was always terrific. So I say that as a great admirer of him. He came to the right decision, and now time is short, but I believe that nothing is written. We can still win it.
It was put to me on the day that the television debate was first announced that they had wanted to go early precisely to try out President Biden to see whether there was still chance, if they needed to swap him out. I mean, is that something that you were aware of?
Certainly not aware of it, and I rather doubt it. After all, he was the incumbent. The view not only of Biden himself, but those around him and the party was, at the time, that he was the right candidate. And he certainly was the right candidate the first go-round. I was a loyal soldier during the first campaign, even during the tough days pre-South Carolina, for many, many reasons, because of his personal qualities and because of his knowledge, not only in foreign affairs, but as someone who could at least try to bridge the gaps. So I doubt that theory is correct. but as many commentators said, Father Time is pretty unrelenting, and people aren't going to unsee what they saw. I hate to say that because, as I said, I'm a huge fan of his. But we are where we are, water under the bridge. I think what's critical now is that the party does not tear itself apart.
And that means what? Endorsing Kamala or not giving her the coronation?
The party has to coalesce, I think, around her, in my view. I think the risks of an open or contested convention are very significant, especially given how little time we have. We have to spend this time now introducing, in the case of Kamala, not so much, but the VP candidate, introducing that candidate to the country and making clear what is at stake. You know, Trump has had a really good couple of weeks. And I have to say I was trying to avoid and forget about the world last week. I was in Iceland. I thought things looked pretty grim. But with this change, we are back, and a lot of people are concerned about what they saw at the Republican convention.
So there are so many things that I want to pick up on. But first of all, running mate, who do you think it should be? Not a person, I'm not looking for a name, but what do they have to bring? Because Donald Trump has picked a mini-me. You know,
Yes.
he's the MAGA mini-me in J.D. Vance. Who does Kamala Harris need to pick?
Well, I think she needs to pick and I hate to say this, but I think this is reality, a white male.
A straight white male?
I wouldn't go that far. People might say that, but I would say a white male. That's where we are. So having two women on the ticket, would be certainly historic, but that's what I would do. Someone who also brings a key swing state. So right away we're narrowing
You're down
the
to
names
three,
down to a few, but a big swing state, and we know what they are. It's be pretty hard, I think, if you look at the electoral math, to win the election for the Democrats if we do not win Pennsylvania and if we do not win Michigan. I'm told there are pathways to victory, but I sort of doubt that there are many. So those two states are critical. So if that is correct, and the diligence on the candidates pans out, you end up with a few names.
So I'm just going to follow up. Josh Shapiro is the governor of Pennsylvania, who is one of the names in the ring. I asked whether they had to be straight because the transport secretary right now, who is also a presidential candidate, Pete Buttigieg, is gay. He's just moved his kids to Michigan to raise them there.
He's from Indiana.
Indiana, not as much of a swing state, but is he?
He's
would you be looking at him?
Look, I had the pleasure of meeting him again at the launch event for the National Finance Committee in Chicago in October of last year. I heard him speak again. He is terrific. He's articulate. He's smart. And his time will come, I believe, profoundly.
That's a no now, is it?
Well, I'm not in a position of choosing anybody, so my view doesn't matter at all. But it might be his time now. I think it may be for the next time. In my view, he's young enough that he can wait. I hope he will play a big part in our future politics.
And what does Kamala need to prove now? Because there are a lot of questions about her. There's been mutterings from people inside the White House that I knew from when I was in Washington about the way she'd done the job, the way she treated people, policy, detail, etc. What is best for her now in terms of her nomination? Is it better that it is just a straight coronation, no one runs against her? Or is it that there is some kind of at least token competition where she has to prove herself?
Well, that's an interesting point. She used the words, I need to win and earn the respect of the party. I think that's right. And we haven't had great experience with anointments in the past, where perhaps some would argue, critics would argue, that Hillary Clinton was anointed. This is a really tough line to walk. I said I don't think we should have a contested convention, but I think she needs to convince the party, the delegates and the elders, that she is the person and she is the logical candidate. I like her very much. I think she's incredibly smart and articulate. I wouldn't say a word against her, partly because I'm a loyal soldier, but not just. And she's got a great team. By the way, she's advised by someone I respect enormously, Phil Gordon, whom you may have met.
I know Phil Gordon.
Phil is superb. I would rate him as one of the best minds on international affairs in Europe that we have in the country.
And can America in 2024 vote for a black woman? I mean, you know, you can say that Hillary Clinton ran a messy, bad campaign in the end, but there was so much misogyny anyway surrounding that campaign. Do you think that 8 years on, you know, a woman of colour is in a better place now? Or have we left the identity politics behind?
Well, there's no room for being naive. Look, when Barack Obama, whom I adore and supported and served, when he won, I thought the country had turned a page.
Yeah.
Perhaps silly, naive me. I thought the country had really turned the page, certainly on racial politics. It has not been the case. I like to believe that being of color and a woman is not a problem today. For some, it will be, perhaps. But are we really trying to attract those voters? Probably not. What we need to now show is that the Democratic Party is the party of sanity, of moderation, and that we're better stewards of the country for the next 4 years. And even if we peel off a relatively small number of swing voters in those key 5 states, as you know both better than anyone, that is enough. Those states were won and lost by margins of less than 100,000 voters, sometimes even much less. Tiny. So that's what we're playing for. It's the small sliver in the middle.
And as someone who's been involved in the money side of this and has been a donor and helped raise money, do you think the taps turn back on now that Joe Biden has gone and Kamala Harris looks like she is going to be the presumptive nominee?
She's just raised 49 million
overnight.
Yeah, I was going to say that they're already on. I've just gotten the figures. I follow those figures. I'm hosting an event actually next week.
In London?
In Paris.
Not far.
The number, I know a lot of people. I won't bore you with the details because our fundraising is incredibly boring, and it's a real one of the seamier undersides of our system. I've done this now 5 times, and I've reached out to 4,000 people in this campaign, just to give you an idea of how boring this is. A lot of people were saying we are hitting the pause button. Now they are saying we're back in. So I'm confident the money's going to come.
I want to ask you another question, which is, you said that Joe Biden has decided kind of, in the last 2 or 3 days that it was over and that he had to pull out. When did you decide? When did you realise that he was not a viable candidate?
Look, this will be slightly personal. I just finished a trip to D.C. and I'd seen a lot of friends in the White House and the State Department.
When was this?
Just before the debate. I won't mention who, but and I was coming up from a high, and then I went to the BA lounge, and I was checking in for my flight. It was the night of the debate, and I saw the debate in the lounge. I will never forget the faces of the people watching that debate. There were screens in the lounge, just like I won't forget where I was at 9/11. One woman was crying. There was a man covering his face with his hands. And I thought, oh my goodness, this will never be unseen. These images will never be unseen. And I thought in the days following, this is going to be very hard to recover. And I say that again as a great fan of Joe Biden's. But politics is a tough game.
What people have said is, this might have been a moment for the people of the BA lounge, but actually most of Middle America were ahead on this one. They'd all kind of accepted, and they all, they were telling us 70%, wasn't it? 73% were saying we don't like either candidate.
Yeah.
I mean, why do you think the Dems just ignored that for so long?
Well, that's really tough. I had seen him months before and thought he was in good shape. He was mentally still quite acute and aware and well briefed. But some of what people were saying is the Joe Biden we've known for a long time. He's not Barack Obama, for the good and the bad, right? He doesn't always hew to a script. Sometimes he goes off piste. But clearly the aging process has been quick. But look, I was concerned about one thing: preserve his legacy. And I sent a couple of messages discreetly. I said nothing out loud. I said to a couple of friends, his legacy is one of the best presidents in decades, is consequential president because of his legislative achievements. Please let that figure into the rationale. He can leave, pass the torch, and I think now he has preserved his legacy. Had he fought to the finish, he may not. I'll say one other thing. I didn't expect him to give up right away, because that's not the Joe Biden that many of us have known. It's said, but it's very true, that this is a person who, from his earliest age, believed he was always underrated and underestimated. He was a kid made fun of because of his stutter. He was a kid, he said, written off by the elites, didn't go to elite university, and yet had an incredible career despite everything, written off repeatedly. So I knew that in his head he would say to himself, here we go again. They are underestimating me and I can bounce back. Except it was so dramatic that I think it was impossible to bounce back.
Tony Gardner, brilliant to have you with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ambassador Gardner, thank you very much. And in a moment, we'll be hearing from one of the world's leading historians on American politics, Simon Schama, on what this moment actually tells us about America.
I'm delighted to say we are joined in the studio now by Simon Schama, none other. There is no voice you would rather hear on the kind of context of all of this today, given all that has happened. And Simon, just before we started recording, we were saying, well, this is a moment in history, 1968, and you went, yeah, up to a point, not the first time this has happened.
Yeah, rely on the, default position of pedantic professor. In fact, Joe Biden is the 6th president not to seek re-election. 3 of them, though, did the deal well in advance. One was James Polk, who was the president responsible for acquiring a large chunk of Mexico. The other one was James Buchanan, immediately before Lincoln, who was regularly voted as the worst president in American history for failing to stop the Civil War. Then there was decent Rutherford B. Hayes, somewhat decent Rutherford B. Hayes, who became president in 1877. But he was responsible for the demolition of Reconstruction after the Civil War and took federal troops out of the South. Have we had enough, everybody? But the crucial figure, I think, is the very first president to walk away from re-election, and that's George Washington. And, that sort of enters the DNA, I think, of the American bloodstream. It seems incredibly improbable in the age of contemporary politics now, especially in the age of Donald Trump, that anyone would relinquish power to be, a citizen farmer, albeit one who owns slaves. But the sense in which there is a kind of noble dream in which having been the embodiment of governmental integrity, seals that integrity by saying, being top American isn't everything in life, is sort of there. I mean,
but why did he walk away? So why did George Washington walk away?
Well, he was called Cincinnati at the time. I mean, it was the sense really in which, it was a common 18th century view, even Edmund Burke held it, that power would corrupt, and well before Badger said power corrupts, absolutely. And the most important thing to do is this extraordinary idea of an idyllic, decent, upright farming person. If this is what the fabulously mythical hero played by Russell Crowe in Gladiator before.
I mean, this is a very different context, isn't it? And I guess LBJ's is the one that we'd go back to in 1968 as being two people.
LBJ's extraordinary.
Right,
yeah.
so LBJ did it right at the end of March because he was told, or he figured out, there was no path to victory, which was essentially what happened to Biden.
Yes. I think that's right. I mean, it's 2 different things. I mean, LBJ, it is the absolutely extraordinary moment, 68 with LBJ, because actually this is a man, as anyone who's read or people who've not read, Robert Caro's amazing multi-volume biography, who lived for almost nothing except political power. His entire life had been really about managing the route to, power, had been given it as a result of the assassination of Jack Kennedy, with whom he had a kind of love-hate relationship. And so it's extraordinary. I was actually new to such babies, but I'm old enough to have been at the coronation convention of LBJ in 1964 in Atlantic City,
Wow.
which culminated with LBJ seemingly arising from underneath the platform. And I seem to remember hundreds of plastic cowboys in parachutes actually descending from the... And so this was a moment of, what's called
Theatrics.
apotheosis, godlike success, and then he smashes Barry Goldwater. So it's an extraordinary thing to think
Because he
back
won
now.
everything except 2, didn't he? Or 5, I think.
Everything what?
Every
Well, the
state.
states, yeah, it was the biggest blowout election.
Yes, enormous blowout. Yeah, absolutely, incredible blowout. And so the magnitude of the horror and sense of what ending can there possibly be in Vietnam.
Exactly. I mean, that is what I wanted to ask you about, which is that the idea of George Washington, the gentleman farmer, going to
Right.
Mount Vernon overlooking
Right.
the Potomac, etc.,
Right.
is one thing. Biden was forced out. I mean, Biden's hand was forced. He didn't want to. The forces were lined up against him. With LBJ, he had just about won New Hampshire. The polling was that he was behind Robert F. Kennedy and others going into, and he just saw that he had to go, otherwise he was facing humiliation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing, the massive difference is that, of course, actually, Biden's, other than the ultimately terminal problem of his age and mental, fitness, cognitive fitness, he's defending an excellent economic record. I mean, it's a big thing to say sorry about the exit from Afghanistan, but of course, actually, the Democrats will instantly say he was carrying out the agreement made by Donald Trump's administration, which is quite true. But LBJ was just surrounded by, him, and he was disappearing into a vortex of insoluble horror, really. In Biden's case, there is a pretty decent record of accomplishment in the administration to defend. So it's unique in the sense in which really the disintegration of the political persona, disintegration of, capacity, was the final factor. The fact is that the modern presidency, and this was known when FDR's polio was covered up, the modern presidency requires more than splendid and competent management. It does require a kind of projection of vigor and energy and all those kinds of things. The PR specifications.
The sort of avatar of the American president.
Exactly.
Marvel
Because America,
character.
particularly empires that occasionally think themselves, not altogether without reason, in decline or weakened or humiliated, as the Afghanistan exit was, especially want to, in a buff way, flex their muscles.
So do you think it is an issue then for Kamala Harris to be succeeding, if she does, and it looks like there is a juggernaut that is rolling towards her getting the nomination?
There is, for sure.
That she knew about the cognitive decline, the loss of mental acuity, however you describe it, the good days, the bad days, etc., for over a year probably, and yet the American people were told he's fine, and that she's got to explain how the American people weren't told the truth.
Well, I think that's probably true, but I think she doesn't have to explain it at all. It's a journalistic, it's what we think about, what historians will undoubtedly think about. Will the American people feel, the commentariat, us lot really, will think, well, if this had all been gone through a year earlier, there might have been a more open process towards the nomination. American people actually turns a leaf over quicker than we can eat our cornflakes for breakfast, really. They absolutely, I don't know for sure, my instinct is this is very low down on their agenda of importance, because events are now rolling, as you both said, very, very fast. Convention is 3 weeks away. They'll come, whoever it is, the ticket will come racing out towards Labor Day, which is September the 4th. Then there's the debate, if indeed Donald Trump really wants it to happen. So it's bang, 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 bang after this. And by the time we get to October, I honestly think, deceits, sleights of hand, cover-ups, is not going to be a great issue for the voting public. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all the rest of it may make it a big issue. Very unlikely they won't. But I don't see it actually, do you? I mean, as a kind of vote catching or an alienating
Trump will
thing.
try to make it so. Trump will try to say Biden was never fit to be the president. Kamala Harris.
He's
knew,
already
and
said that.
Yeah. And
All
she
you have
covered
to
it
do
up.
is play the greatest hits of Trump not getting to the end of his sentence.
Sure.
Can I just take you back to the Biden legacy? Because what we saw within 20 minutes of his post coming out was people saying this is the most generous thing he's ever done. You know, all the people that had called for him to go suddenly
Right.
became the people that were like, this is the most gracious and democratic and wonderful thing. I mean, do you think it hasn't yet sunk in what he has managed to achieve in the last 4 years? Do you think that he will be sort of remembered for that, or will he be remembered as the guy who quit? I mean, when we write the first draft, you write the real draft of history, right? So I guess I'm curious to see how you think this will play out longer term for him.
Well, the graduate student already beginning his PhD thesis on the Biden administration will indeed be cataloguing an inventory mostly of accomplishments, but actually the exit from Afghanistan was, even though it was pretty much executing slightly more carefully what Donald Trump, the Trump administration done, even so it was close to traumatic. It was horrifying, scenes at the airport, the wound to the so that was a big deal. Thereafter, however, the exit from COVID, whether or not he can get tremendous credit for the winding down of the pandemic.
I mean, there is a pattern here, which is that the post-COVID leaders do not last. Right? They're all thrown out of power, aren't they?
He said, stroking his chin. Probably. I mean, do we count Macron in that? But yeah, certainly in this country, it's the case. He's is there a connection really between Biden's physical fragility and weakness and a kind of a memory really of an entire nation disabled by this infectious disease, maybe subconsciously? I think the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, I think actually what the earnest historian will point to, because it actually runs so much against the grain, doesn't it, of the last decade or so, is his ability to put together bipartisan agreements, whether it's actually dealing with the debt ceiling and not shutting down the government, the Inflation Reduction Act. All those years of an instinct. Yeah, very difficult. You hear Mitch McConnell, in a relationship of political opposition to each other, but not of mutual hatred, really. So that, I think, could be the last time, that sort of arrangement happens. And in fact, actually, when the Republicans, as they will do, even as we're talking now, actually say, well, she was crap at actually the only serious job she had running the border, they no doubt will come back and say, well, Joe Biden, in particular, managed to put together a bipartisan, extremely fierce piece of legislation to not just, not control the border, but hire, how many was it, John? Thousands and thousands of agents. It was pretty damn fierce until Trump instructed Republicans in Congress to block it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Simon, I know I hesitate to ask you to look forward when we're with a historian who is there to look backwards, but to look forward.
Right.
I mean, you follow American politics and the history of it incredibly closely. You know a lot of the players involved. Kamala Harris, what are the issues for her that she needs to address? What is the support she needs to win, not just in the country, but among Democrats who may have worked with her and find her difficult, whatever, attention to detail on policy? I don't know.
Well, that was, you've mentioned the last one. I mean, she was... there was a time when it was thought during the presidential campaign, which did not end well. She had that extraordinary kind of starry moment when she actually pulled Joe Biden up short, and it was suddenly she was absolutely the best thing. You saw the kind of tough guy prosecutor, absolutely. And then she sort of gradually kind of crumbled, really. And some of the criticism was about her inattention to detail, her weird sort of feebleness somehow, actually, when she was in a debate situation. You cannot believe, really, that she's not... if she hasn't improved on that record, then, everybody's deluding themselves. But my own instinct about this is that she's improved enormously. And in fact, as the buzz around Joe Biden's inability, even before the terrible debate, the buzz got louder about whether or not he was up for a campaign, never mind another 4 years. So she's been rather effective, actually. Everybody acknowledges that in medium-sized meetings and rallies and so on, in defending the administration's record. But truth is, we really don't know, as one of the many as we say, kind of uncharted moments. And the first big decision she'll have to make is who else is going to be on the ticket. So that will tell us something, I think, actually.
Does she make this choice, Simon? Or, what's interesting about this is we're trying to work out, in the absence of a 1922 committee, in the absence of a Graham Brady, what part is the machine, the party machine, and what part is it just down to her as an individual to kind of decide what she does next?
The two ex-presidents will have a very important say, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, for sure.
And are they on the same page, do you think? Because that's not entirely clear, right?
We know nothing about... We don't know. Bill and Hillary were much... They stayed longer in the keep Joe Biden running camp than did
But
Barack
they've now
Obama,
endorsed Kamala Harris.
They have. And Barack Obama has not explicitly endorsed Kamala Harris. So, my own feeling, and I don't have any great insight, detailed insight about it, is that many people, including Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, will produce the shortlist. Produce the shortlist. But I don't know of any case where it's been said, well, the ticket that the second person on the ticket really has been imposed on a president. It's very, very difficult to believe that Mike Pence was imposed on Donald Trump, really. So I would expect she would have the final call on that,
Just give us a last thought about America in 2024. The country has been through an attempted assassination, right, on one candidate, which feels so long ago now, but was not an insignificant moment in time, in history. And then we've been through the kind of coronation of Trump at the RNC last week. And now we are seeing the replacement of a president. I'm just sort of, you spend a lot of your time there. What is the sort of, what is the American psyche now about their, the sort of...
Well, but you have too, dear Emily, and that there is a split personality. On the one hand, there is the kind of up and at it, ever since Theodore Roosevelt, the up and at it endless demand for freshness, for strength, for muscularity, for chest-beating patriotism, for doing stuff, kind of mums and Little League, ball games. Really, there's this extraordinary... It's so deeply rooted, the kind of can-do exhilaration.
It's very civic as well, isn't it?
On the other hand, there is suburban America, vast stretches of suburban America, which wants really a calm bake sale. It wants a nice meeting at school for its kids. It wants to go to church in peace. It does not want riot or place being burnt down. So those two kind of aspects of the American character, which really do go way back to the kind of Jeffersonian ideal of planting your carrots or your sorghum or whatever it is. On the other hand, that America will change the world, that it is a kind of new kind of place in the world, living by ideals, not by birth and rank and so on. These are in constant competition. If you ask me my hunch, I think the independent voter, notionally suburbanites, often it's said in Milwaukee where the Republicans had their convention, but suburban America, independent voters who are not partisan one way or the other, are likely to come down in favour of the less disruptive candidate. And oddly enough, it may turn out, don't quote me, it may turn out that a black female candidate is seen as less chaotically explosive and dangerous than an ex-president. It may well come to that. That's my hunch about it. But, one thing about American politics, you just say it, is you really, really never know just what's around the corner.
Sir Simon Schama, thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
And we will be back tomorrow, obviously following this story incredibly closely, because it's a white-knuckle ride right now where we don't know what is going to happen next.
But we are also talking to Ofcom about media, regulation, and whether people are getting away with stuff they just shouldn't be. Bye for now.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.